Okay. All right. We're going to go through Matthew 21 through 24 tonight. Quite a bit. And this is Jesus comes to Jerusalem as king. And actually, this day was predicted by the book of Daniel. And one detective from Scotland Yard did the homework and from the prophecy of Daniel said that the day that Daniel said the Messiah would come would be the 10th of Nisan on this year. And so, anyway, this is Jesus comes to Jerusalem as a king. And this is chapter 21, verse 1. This is on the 10th of Nisan. As they approached Jerusalem, they came to Bethphage, to the Mount of Olives. Jesus sent two disciples, saying, go to the village ahead of you, and at once you will find a donkey tied there with her colt by her. Untie them and bring them to me. And if anyone says anything to you, say the Lord needs them, and he will send them right away. And this took place to fulfill what was spoken through the prophet Zechariah. Say to the daughter of Zion, see, your king comes to you, gentle and riding on a donkey and on a colt and the foal of a donkey. So this is a donkey that's never been ridden on, so it normally would buck. So this was a miracle. And how this all worked out, when we know Jesus told Peter to go fishing and there would be a coin inside the fish, and that happened. And so Jesus knew all this, and he's in control of everything. And riding on a donkey is a sign of peace. That when the king came in on a donkey, it was a sign of peace. Came in on a horse, it was a sign of war. And the disciples went and did as Jesus had instructed them. They brought the donkey and the colt and placed their cloaks on them for Jesus to sit on. A very large crowd spread their cloaks on the road, while others cut branches from the trees and spread them on the road. And the crowd that went ahead of him and those followed shouted, Hosanna, which means save us now, to the Son of David, the Messiah, and blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. And that's another quote from Psalm 118, 25, and 26. And that's a messianic psalm. And they say, Hosanna in the highest heaven. And when Jesus entered Jerusalem, the whole city was stirred and asked, who is this? The crowd answered, this is Jesus, the prophet from Nazareth. So what the people there, I think this is probably mostly the people that were following him all the way from Galilee, and they greeted him, and they think he came in the sheep gate in Jerusalem. If you go there, ask where the sheep gate is. And but actually what they did was they did what they did on the Feast of Sukkot, the Feast of Tabernacles. They had the branches, and people will carry their branches, and then they sing Hosanna. That's the song that they sing on Sukkot. And so these people were ready for the kingdom. It was like Peter, when he was up on the Mount of Transfiguration, he wanted to build some shelters, and he thought it was time for the beginning of the kingdom. And they were hoping that this would be the beginning of the kingdom too. But the leaders had already turned down his offer of the kingdom, but that was predicted. And Jesus entered the temple courts and drove out all who were buying and selling there. He overturned the tables of the money changers and the benches of those selling doves. And it is written, he said, my house will be called a house of prayer. And that's a quote from Isaiah 56, verse 7. but you are making a den of robbers. And that's a quote from Jeremiah 7, verse 11. So they had set up this kind of money-making business inside the temple, and it was pretty corrupt, and they charged outrageous exchange rates and all these things, and are making a lot of money for Annas, the high priest, and all the high priests. And but anyway, he did this as a sign that he was cleaning out his house for the Passover. And this is what they do starting on the 10th of Nisan. It will clean out their house and get all the leaven out of it. So basically he's saying that this is my house. I'm getting the leaven out of it. In verse 14, the blind and lame came to him in the temple and he healed them. So he was healing those who came to him at that time. But when the chief priests and teachers of the law saw the wonderful things he did, and the children shouting in the temple courts, Hosanna to the Son of David, they were indignant. And do you hear what these children are saying? They asked him. Yes, replied Jesus. Have you never read, from the lips of children and infants, you, Lord, have called forth your praise? And that's a quote from Psalm 8, verse 2. And so they weren't happy about that because they were praising the Messiah, basically, and they're saying, hey, they're praising the Messiah and they're doing it to you, and aren't you upset about that? And he hears them, and he wasn't upset about that. And verse 17, he left them and went out of the city to Bethany, where he spent the night. And we know he went to, whenever he was in Jerusalem, he spent the night at Mary and Martha and Lazarus' house. Early in the morning, as Jesus was on his way back to the city, he was hungry. Seeing a fig tree by the road, he went up to it, but found nothing on it except leaves. Then he said to it, May you never bear fruit again. Immediately the tree withered. And so it wasn't in anybody's orchard or anything like that. It was in the open, but this was very symbolic. In this context, it becomes a picture for Israel. Israel claims to know the one true God and should have been able to provide the spiritual nourishment for those who came to her, but Israel also had become fruitless and therefore falls under the curse. So that's the lesson that this miracle was portraying for his disciples. One of the Old Testament images of God's judgment on Israel was the picture of the land being unable to bear figs. And that's in Jeremiah 8, verse 13, and Micah 7, verse 1 through 6. So that's also, it's fulfilling kind of a prophecy. Verse 20, when the disciples saw this, they were amazed. How did the fig tree wither so quickly, they asked. Jesus replied, Truly I tell you, if you have faith and do not doubt, not only can you do what was done to the fig tree, but also you can say to this mountain, Go throw yourself into the sea, and it will be done. If you believe, you will receive whatever you ask. Of course, it's got to be within the will of God when you pray. A mountain in the Bible sometimes stands for a kingdom. Several passages that mention this in Psalms, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Daniel, and also in the book of Revelation. The sea likewise has the metaphor meaning of the Gentiles, nations, Deuteronomy and Psalms and Isaiah, and two passages there. So I think that this kingdom is going to be spread into the Gentile world, is what Jesus is predicting with this statement, basically. Verse 23, Jesus entered the temple courts, and while he was teaching, the chief priests and elders of the people came to him. By what authority are you doing these things, they asked. And who gave you this authority? So they're basically, it's a trick question once again, and it doesn't matter how he answers it, they're going to condemn it by it. But Jesus replied, like a good rabbi, he replies with a question. I will also ask you one question. If you answer me, I will tell you by what authority I'm doing these things. John's baptism, where did it come from? Was it from heaven or of human origin? And they discussed it among themselves and said, if we say from heaven, he will ask, then why don't you believe him? But if we say of human origins, we are afraid of the people, for they all hold that John was a prophet. So they answered Jesus, we don't know. Then he said, neither will I tell you by what authority I'm doing these things. So John, he had the authority of God, and he was pointing out Jesus as the Messiah. And so if he got his authority from God, then Jesus got his authority from God. But what do you think? There was a man who had 2 sons. He went to the first and said, son, go and work today in the vineyard. I will not, he answered. But later he changed his mind and went. Then the father went to the other son and said the same thing. He answered, I will, sir, but he did not go. Which of the 2 did what his father wanted? The first, they answered. Jesus said to them, truly I tell you, the tax collectors and prostitutes are entering the kingdom of God ahead of you. And so basically they're the ones who said, I'm not going to do it, but then they do it. And so they rejected him at first, but then they repent and do it. And the other ones act like they're going to do it and don't do it. And they're the Pharisees, is what he's saying. Verse 32, for John came to show you the way of righteousness, and you did not believe him, but the tax collectors and prostitutes did. And even after you saw this, you did not repent and believe him. And so that's who he's making the illustration between them and that, and they came to the Lord. They realized they had a problem and repented and sought his way of righteousness. And the Pharisees didn't realize that they had a problem was the problem. And listen to another parable. There was a landowner who planted a vineyard. He put a wall around it, dug a winepress in it, and built a watchtower. And then he rented the vineyard to some farmers and moved to another place. So he did all this work on it. I didn't do the fly-in stuff, but anyway, the parable of the vineyard found in Isaiah 5, verses 1 through 7, and Psalm 80, verses 8 through 16, in which the vineyard represents Israel and the landowner represents God, the landowner, entrusts his vineyards to the represented leaders of Israel. And so he built this good vineyard with all the protection around it, everything, and then he turned it over to the leaders, the Pharisees of Israel. And 34, when the harvest time approached, he sent his servants to the tenants to collect his fruit. The tenant seized his servants. They beat one, killed another, and stoned a third. Then he sent other servants to them. More than the first time, the tenants treat them the same way. So anyway, this is Israel, and the tenants are in there, and they're supposed to give unto God what is God's, the first fruits and everything, and they weren't doing it. Last of all, he sent his son to them. They will respect my son, he said. But when the tenants saw the son, they said to each other, this is the heir. Come, let us kill him and take his inheritance. And so the son represented Jesus, who Jesus sent. And they're going to kill him and then we'll own it all. But it's actually owned by God. So they took him and threw him out of the vineyard and killed him. And therefore, when the owner of the vineyard comes, what will he say to these tenants? He will bring those wretches to a wretched end, they replied, and he will rent the vineyard to other tenants who will give him his share of the crop at harvest time. So this was the Israel, and they're going to, for what they did, they're going to pay in 70 AD, and others are going to take it over after that. And Jesus said to them, have you never read in the scriptures, the stone the builder rejected has become the cornerstone? He, Lord, has done this, and it is marvelous in our eyes. And that's Psalm 18, 22 and 23. Of course, this was actual event when they built the first tabernacle. They rejected the cornerstone, and then after they were done, they realized, hey, we don't have the cornerstone. Asked the wood stone cutters, where's the cornerstone? They said, we sent it to you. Look in your trash. So they looked in the trash and found out that they had rejected the cornerstone, and then they used the cornerstone. And so anyway, that was a symbol of that they're going to reject the Messiah, and then they're going to accept him later. In 43, therefore I tell you that the kingdom of God will be taken away from you and given to a people who will produce fruit. In 44, anyone who falls on this stone will be crushed to pieces. Anyone on whom it falls will be crushed. And that's a quote from Isaiah 14, 8, 14 through 15. But some manuscripts do not have this verse in there. But this is probably, it could be referring to the 70 AD again, I believe. Verse 45, when the chief priests and Pharisees heard Jesus's parables, they knew he was talking about them. They looked for a way to arrest him, but they were afraid of the crowd because the people held him to be a prophet. Chapter 22. Then Jesus spoke to them again in parables, saying, the kingdom of heaven is like a king who prepared a wedding banquet for his son. He sent his servants to those who had been invited to the banquet to tell them to come, but they refused to come. Then he sent some more servants and said, tell those who have been invited that I have prepared my dinner. My oxen and my fattened cattle have been butchered, and everything is ready. Come to the wedding banquet. And but they paid no attention and went off. One to his field, the other to his business. Nothing real pertinent right now. The rest seized of his servants, mistreated them, and killed them. So that's the thanks they got. And the king was enraged. He sent his army and destroyed those murderers and burned the city. And then he said to his servants, the wedding banquet is ready, but those I invited did not deserve to come. So go into the street corners, invite to the banquet anyone you find. So the people went out into the streets and gathered all the people they could find, the bad as well as the good. The wedding hall was filled with guests. So I think this is actually talking about the church age that was to come, and that the kingdom is going to be in the souls of the believers. And I think there's going to be a similar type situation in the time of Jacob's trouble, the 7 years of tribulation, but I think the Jewish people are going to come to the Lord then at the end. So I think this is referring to in 70 AD again, and that the kingdom was started after that. But when the king came in to see the guest, he noticed a man was there not wearing wedding clothes. And he asked, "How did you get here without wedding clothes, friend?" The friend was speechless. Well, what happens if a king would have a big feast like this? They would have wedding clothes for people. People would put them on. And so they would be rightly clothed. So this guy wasn't rightly clothed, and he didn't do what he had to do to be righteous and rightly clothed. And so he wasn't ready to go and see the king. Then the king told the attendants, "Tie him hand and foot, throw him outside into the darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. For many were invited, but few were chosen." So he didn't have the right righteousness to go to the feast, and he had to go outside. And weeping is when you're sad because you missed out, and gnashing of the teeth because you're kind of miserable. And so this is an illustration of the kingdom to come again. Then the Pharisees went out and laid plans to trap him in his words. So they're going to set up a trap for him. And they sent their disciples to him along with the Herodians. That's Herodians are kind of the politicians. They're kind of unbelievers. They are nothing. And teacher, they said, "We know that you are a man of integrity and that you teach the way of God in accordance with the truth. You aren't swayed by others because you pay no attention to who they are." So it's kind of a compliment. And so they said, "Tell us then, what is your opinion? Is it right to pay imperial tax to Caesar or not?" So this was a big setup again. And they had the idea if you paid these taxes to Caesar, he was your king, and you were worshiping him. And if you didn't, then you would get in trouble with Caesar. Maybe you'd get arrested. So it was a damned if you do, damned if you don't question. But Jesus, knowing their evil intent, said, "You hypocrites, two-faced, why are you trying to trap me? Show me the coin used for paying the tax." They brought him a denarius, that was a day's wage, and he asked them, "Whose image is this, and whose inscription?" "Caesar's," they replied. Then he said to them, "So give back to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God." And when they heard this, they were amazed. So they left him and went away. So he got rid of the Herodians, but the coin was in Caesar's image. We're in God's image, so we have to give ourselves to God, is basically what he's saying. And we are owned by God. And so he had a brilliant answer to their trick question. Then came the Sadducees. The Sadducees didn't believe in God really. They didn't believe in the afterlife, and they only believed in the first 5 books of the Bible, the Pentateuch. And the same day, the Sadducees, who say there is no resurrection, came to him with a question. "Teacher," they said, "Moses told us that if a man dies without having children, his brother must marry the widow and raise up the offspring for him. Now there were 7 brothers among us. The first one married and died, and since he had no children, he left his wife to his brother. Same thing happened to the second, third, right down to the 7th. I think they should check out that woman." But anyway, finally, the woman died. Now then, at the resurrection, whose wife shall she be of the 7, since all of them were married to her? So they didn't believe in the resurrection, but they just came up with this trick question, basically, see if they could fool them. Jesus replied, "You are in error because you do not know the scriptures or the power of God." So they don't know the power of God. That's very important. And they don't know the scriptures. Very important. At the resurrection, people will neither marry nor be given in marriage. They will be like angels in heaven. So there's not going to be sexual relationships in heaven. You're just going to be totally filled with joy and love and pleasure and everything. There's not going to be able to get any better when you're in heaven. And they won't need to work on making offspring there because everybody who gets there has already uh, made their way to the right standing with God. And 31, but about the resurrection of the dead, have you not read what Jesus said to you? And I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. That's Exodus 3, verse 6. He is not the God of the dead, but the living. And when the crowds heard this, they were astonished at his teaching. Notice he didn't go to any of the prophets that talk about the afterlife. Isaiah and Jeremiah talk about the afterlife, and others do too. And but he used a quote from the first 5 books to prove the afterlife, and just said, he said, "I'm the God of was the God of Isaac and Jacob." No, he didn't say I was, I am. And so that's proof of the resurrection that he did with the Sadducees. Hearing that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees, the Pharisees got together. One of them, an expert in the law, tested him with this question: "Teacher, which is the greatest commandments in the law?" And Jesus replied, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and with all your mind." That's a quote from Deuteronomy 6, verse 5. This is the first and greatest commandment, and the second is like it: love your neighbor as yourself. Leviticus 19, verse 18. All the law and the prophets hang on these 2 commandments. So take the 10 commandments, the first 4 commandments, hang on, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and then you'll do all these things. You won't take his name in vain. You won't worship other gods when you have that relationship. And if you love your neighbor as yourself, you won't steal from your neighbor. You won't do all these bad things to your neighbor. You'll love them. You don't need these other laws. They're all will be fulfilled based on these 2 laws. And while the Pharisees were gathered together, Jesus asked them, "What do you think about the Messiah? Whose son is he?" "The son of David," they replied. He said to them, "How is it then that David, speaking by the Spirit, calls him Lord? For he says, 'The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I put your enemies under your feet.'" And that's Psalm 110, verse 1, and that's a messianic psalm. And so the Lord said to my Lord. And so this is Jesus is the son of David, but also he is God, according to this quote. And if David calls him Lord, how can he be his son? No one could say a word in reply, and from that day on, no one dared ask him any more questions. He had great answers to all the questions. Chapter 23, and then Jesus said to the crowd and to the disciples, "The teachers of the law, the Pharisees, sit in Moses' seat. So you must be careful to do everything they tell you, but do not do what they do, for they do not practice what they preach. They tie up heavy, cumbersome loads and put them on other people's shoulders, but they themselves are not willing to lift a finger to move them. Everything they do is done for people to see. They make their phylacterias, those are the boxes that are put on their wrists, their arms and foreheads, and they make those wide, and the tassels on their garment long, and to love the place of honor at the banquets and the most important seats at synagogue. So these guys, they have a problem with pride. They try to look good and want to look good and want people to admire them, and they just are not loving to other people. And they made all these other laws, and just that is cumbersome on the people when they should have probably just taught them the two main laws, and they could have figured it out and just not work on the Sabbath. They love to be greeted with respect in the marketplace and to be called rabbi by others. But you are not to be called rabbi, for you have one teacher, and you are all brothers. And you do not call anyone on earth Father, for you have one Father, he is in heaven. So a lot of people called them Father too. And nor are you to be called instructors, for you have one instructor, the Messiah. The greatest among you will be your servant, and those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. And so he's saying that in the next life, those greatest are not going to be the greatest there, and if they make it there. And just you got to be humble in this life. You got to be a servant in this life and serve the Lord and do it to make glorify Him and not glorify yourself. And Jesus began his ministry in Galilee with 8 blesseds, and that's in chapter 5, 3 through 11, but he ended in Judea with 7 woes, compared to the 6 woes of Isaiah 5 verse 8 and the 23 through 23 and the 5 woes of Habakkuk 2 verse 6 through 20. He introduced each indictment with the word woe. Jesus spoke of the scribes and Pharisees, but he spoke to the crowds and his disciples also. So he's going to say these woes again, which is kind of like sorry and also kind of like a curse. But the reason he's going to woe them is that they have the wrong righteousness. And they have a works righteousness, and they've done all these wrong things. And so this is the reason that he's condemning them in all these woes. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You shut the door of the kingdom of heaven in people's faces. You yourself do not enter, nor will you let those who are trying to. So that's the first thing they did wrong. They rejected Jesus' messiahship. They were the leaders, and everyone accepted their decision, so they closed the door of the kingdom at that time. And woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You travel over land and sea to win a single convert, and when you have succeeded, you make him twice as much a child of hell as you are. And so, what's the problem? They're going to convert him to their religion, but their religion is a false religion, and they're going to go to hell with him. So they did him no favor by converting him to their religion. And the next woe to you, blind guides! You say, if anyone swears by the temple, it means nothing. But if anyone swears by the gold of the temple, it is bound by an oath. You blind fools, which is greater, the gold or the temple that makes the gold sacred? You say, if anyone swears by the altar, it means nothing. But if anyone swears by the gift on the altar, it is bound by that oath. You blind men, which is better, the gift or the altar that makes the gift sacred? Therefore, anyone who swears by the altar swears by it and everything on it, and anyone who swears by the temple swears by it and by the one who dwells in it. And anyone who swears by heaven swears by God, the throne, and the one who sits in it. So the only thing you really can is the owner of the temple is the swear by, and it's God that you're swearing by, and that's the only thing you actually can swear by, and that's why uh, you swear to tell the truth, so help you God, in our courts, and that's the ultimate one to swear to. You don't swear to all these other things, is what he's saying. But that's what they were saying to people, and they're taking God out of the picture. Basically, is what he's saying. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You give a tenth of your spices, mint, dill, and cumin, but you have neglected the more important matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. You should have practiced the latter without neglecting the former. So it wasn't wrong to give a tenth, but the problem is in their system, they were set up for the spiritual laws, but they're also set up for the civil laws. And the civil laws, um, they were not fulfilling. They were violating themselves. They let some of their followers violate the laws, but they came down very hard on people that weren't um, part of the church or people that were living in the country that were Gentiles, and so I think the civil laws were intended to be equal on all the people, and the spiritual laws, and I think the judges did it in the time of Moses, did the civil laws, and you should have practiced the latter without neglecting the former. You blind guides, you strain out the net but swallow a camel. So what they did was made sure they didn't get any bugs in their wine, so they'd filter it through a scarf or something and make sure they didn't get any gnats. And he said, you know, you're good about keeping the little things out, but you got a problem inside that only God can fix. And it's basically it's an illustration. Both of gnat and camel in the Hebrew are very similar words, but he makes the point that you have a problem that you can't fix. And woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You clean the outside of the cup and dish, but inside you're full of greed and self-indulgence. And so this is the same thing again. He's kind of explaining it here. Blind Pharisees, clean the inside of the cup and dish, then the outside will also be clean. So take care of the righteousness inside first, and then the outside will take care of itself. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You are like whitewashed tombs. Will look beautiful on the outside, but insides are full of uh, bones of the dead and everything unclean. They would put paint over the top of tombs so people wouldn't step on them, but it doesn't make anything. It doesn't fix the inside, basically. In the same way, on the outside you appear to people as righteous, but inside you're full of hypocrisy and wickedness. And Jesus knew what was on their inside. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You build tombs for the prophets and decorate the graves of the righteous. So they made a lot of big tombs for all the prophets that they had the graves of at this time, and celebrated their lives basically. And you say, if we had lived in the day of our ancestors, we would not have taken part with them in shedding the blood of prophets. So they're kind of proud about that. So you testify against yourself that you are descended of those who murdered the prophets. They never repented about it. They just thought they were better. Go ahead then and complete what your ancestors started. You snakes, you brood of vipers, how will you escape being condemned to hell? And therefore I'm sending you prophets and sages and teachers. Some of them You will kill and crucify others. You will flog in your synagogues and pursue from town to town. So basically, he's saying, hey, you guys who are sad that your ancestors killed these prophets, you're going to kill the prophet they were talking about. You're going to kill me, and I'm going to send out apostles afterwards and other teachers, and you're going to mess with them too. So you're no better than them, you're worse than them, he's saying. And so upon you will come all the righteous blood that has been shed on earth, from the blood of the righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah son of Berechiah, whom you murdered between the temple and the altar. Truly I tell you, this will come on this generation. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who kill the prophets and stone those who sent you, how often I have longed to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chick under her wings, and you were not willing. Look, your house is left desolate, for I tell you, you will not see me again until you say, Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. So they're not going to see him. This is when he comes on the clouds. This is when he comes again, basically, is what he's saying. And he's going to say, and he wanted to have Israel under his protection. He wanted to have kingdom now. He wept over Jerusalem when he knew this was going to happen. He wasn't happy about it, but these are the people that are responsible, and you're going to see in the future, basically. Get to chapter 24, which is getting into prophecy now. 24 and 25 are prophecies, but we're not going to get into 25. And Jesus left the temple and was walking away when his disciples came to him to call his attention to the buildings. Do you see all these things? He asked. Truly I tell you, not one stone here will be left on another. Every one will be thrown down. As Jesus was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately. Tell us, he said, when will this happen, and what is the sign of your coming and the end of the age? So they thought maybe they were all going to come at the same time. And so actually we know the temple's going to come down in 70 AD. And it's going to be amazing because the stones were huge, and the Romans thought some gold melted when they burned down part of it, and it's in between the rocks, so they pushed over all these huge rocks. And actually, when you have the western wall there, that's the outside wall. That wasn't the temple. All the temple rocks were torn down. So he's got to answer these three questions. Jesus answered, watch out that no one deceives you, for many will come in my name, claiming I am the Messiah, and will deceive many. This is going to happen throughout the church age, but it's going to happen particularly during the tribulation, the time of Jacob's trouble. You will hear of wars and rumors of war, but see to it that you are not alarmed. Such things must happen, but the end is still to come. There's going to be wars all the way through the church age, and there's going to be more and more frequently wars, and there's going to be wars in before the tribulation and during the tribulation, but it's not the end yet. Nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these are the beginning of birth pangs. So there's going to be something born, and it's going to be the kingdom that's going to come in the future. And so the birth pangs are going to get stronger and more frequent. And then you will be handed over to be persecuted and put to death, and you will be hated by the nations because of me. At that time, many will turn away from the faith and betray and hate each other. So this could have happened during the Second World War and different times, and I think it's going to happen during the tribulation time too. And many false prophets will appear and deceive many people, and that's during the tribulation. As there's been many false prophets, but the big one's going to come during the tribulation. And because of the increase of wickedness, the love of most will grow cold, but the one who stands firm to the end will be saved. And so those one who stand firm in the faith to the end, when Jesus comes again, they're going to be picked up from the earth and saved from the earth at that time, I believe. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all the nations, and then the end will come. So the 144,000 Jews are going to go out to the whole world, and all the nations are going to get the gospel of the kingdom. They have to trust in Jesus the Messiah to be saved when the kingdom when the end comes. If they haven't made that commitment, they're not going to be saved. So when you see standing in the holy place the abomination of desolation, that's from Daniel 9 and 11 verse 12, spoken through the prophet Daniel, let the reader understand. So this was when the Antichrist is going to put a big statue of himself, I believe, in the temple and start sacrificing pigs. He helped them build the temple, set up their sacrifices. Now he's going to take over the temple and say he's God. And so let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let the one who is on the housetop go down to take anything out. Don't let them go down and take anything out of the house. Let no one in the field go back to get their cloak. How dreadful it will be in those days for the pregnant woman and nursing mothers, because they can't go very fast. Pray that your flight will not take place in winter or on the Sabbath. They can't go that far on the Sabbath. For then there will be great distress, unequaled from the beginning of the world until now, and never will be equaled again. So this is the second half of the tribulation. The first 3.5 years was not so bad, and then this is going to be the worst time ever on earth. They're to go to the mountains, and we believe that they're going to go to Petra, that Buddy was talking about, and that's where they're going to hide. And it could be that they're going to hide there, and they're going to be safe there. And if those days were not cut short, no one should survive, but for the sake of elect, those days will be shortened. Well, we don't know exactly what this means, whether there be less daylight during the day, which it could be, or it could be, I don't think there's going to be, it's going to be a short time until he comes again, 3.5 years, and maybe it's just saying a short time, but somehow they're going to be shortened. At that time, if anyone says to you, look, here is the Messiah, they're going to come up there and maybe make announcements, or there he is, do not believe him. Don't leave the mountains. For false messiahs and false prophets will appear and perform great signs and wonders to deceive. If possible, even the elect are going to be deceived. And so they're going to be able to do it in the power of Beelzebub, and he's going to claim to be the Messiah. See, I have told you ahead of time, so if anyone tells you, there he is out there in the wilderness, do not go out, or here he is in the inner rooms, do not believe it. For as lightning comes from the east and is visible even in the west, so it will be when the coming of the Son of Man. Whenever there is a carcass, there will be vultures. Vultures will gather. And so he's going to come on the clouds. It's going to be something that's going to be seen around the world. It's going to be clearly visible. This is the only time you can come out. And he's going to save them. And the ones who are going to be left behind are going to be the carcass, and the vultures will be gathering around them. 29, immediately after the distress of those days, the sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its light, the stars will fall from the sky, and the heavenly bodies will be shaken. That's Isaiah 13 and 34, and I think it's in the book of Joel too. But Anyway, it's going to be the sun is not going to reflect off the moon. It's the sun is the problem, and it's going to be the Birkeland currents that run to the sun, and the same Birkeland currents that run to a lot of the stars in the sky. They're going to go dark, and then we're going to have our magnetic field is going to go dark because our Birkeland current is going to go weak, and a lot of bad things are going to fall on the earth. Then will appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and then all the people on earth will mourn when they see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And that's a quote from Daniel 7:13 and 14. And he will send his angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather his elect from the four winds and from the ends of heaven to the other. So they're going to do a rescue mission from all the elects and get them out of there before the earth is going to be bombarded, basically. And so he's going to come on the clouds, and they're going to rescue the believers. Now learn this lesson from the fig tree. As soon as its twigs get tender and its leaves come out, you know that summer is near. Even so, when you see all these things, you will know that it is near, right at the door. Truly I tell you, this generation will certainly not pass away until these things happen. Heaven and earth will pass away, but not my words will never pass away. So what generation he's talking about? I think that generation is going to see the destruction of the temple, but I think the generation that sees all these signs during the tribulation are not going to pass away, and they're going to be there till the end. It's going to be the same generation to the end. Some of them are going to pass away. But about that day or hour no one knows, not even the angels in heaven nor the Son. Some manuscripts do not have the Son part, but only the Father. I think Jesus in heaven, when he's back connected with his full deity again, he knows when it's going to be. And as it was in the day of Noah, so it will be in the coming of the Son of Man. For in the days before the flood, people were eating and drinking, marrying, and giving in marriage up until the day Noah entered the ark, and they knew nothing about what would happen until the flood came and took them away. That is how it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. 2 men will be in the field, one will be taken, the other will left. 2 women will be grinding with a handmill, one will be taken, the other left. Some think that's the rapture, but no, this is the time where the angels come and pick them up and rescue them before the others going to go through the, not flood of water, they're going to go through a flood of fire. Therefore keep watch, because you do not know on or what day the Lord will come. But understand this: if the owner of the house had known at what time of night the thief was coming, he would have kept watch and would have not let his house be broken into. So you must be ready, because the Son of Man will come in an hour when you do not expect it. Who then is the faithful and wise servant, whom the master has put in charge of the servants in his household to give them food at the proper time? It will be good for the servant whose master finds him doing so when he returns. So you got to take care of the people, basically, is what he's telling them. Truly I tell you, he will put him in charge of all his possession. This is during the kingdom. But suppose that my servant is wicked and says to himself, my master is staying away a long time, and then begins to beat his fellow servants and to eat and drink with drunkards. The master of the servant will come on a day when he does not expect him, in an hour he's not aware. He will cut him to pieces and assign him to a place with hypocrites where there'll be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So he's telling us to be faithful to the end and keep living the life and be a strong finisher. So overview of the end times. You can see it here.